looking to buck their first UFC loss in their first UFC fight. We have the former EFC and Cage Warriors flyweight champ Jake Hadley, the nickname White Kong, change it, taking on Carlos the Canon Candelario. It's a little bit better, but coming up in this matchup right here, you look at their records, 8-1, 8-2. Decent level of competition for both guys. For Candelario, came in on Dana White's Contender Series a few years ago. Back in 2017, it was the first season. He picks up a win there against one Ronaldo Candido. And after winning that fight, he took a really long time off. He had multiple issues with his knees. He gets a win over Miguel Restrepo, and then he ends up on Contender Series again. He takes on Victor Altamirano, wins round 1, loses round 2, loses round 3, loses split decision, but Dana White said, hey, I thought he won the fight. We're signing the guy.
It was a good fight.
It was the first fighter to lose on Contender Series, was Carlos Candelario, to get an opportunity into the UFC. They fed him to the wolves in his first fight against Tatsuro Taira.
Oh, no.
It did not go all that well for Candelario. He had to defend the takedowns. He wasn't able to implement his own offensive wrestling game, which is pretty well a hallmark. Candelario's ground and pound is a giant statement of his game as well. So for Candelario, struggled to find the range, struggled with his own striking in that fight, and now he's looking to pick up the pieces against a stylistic equal in Jake Hadley, a guy who's very good at his offensive wrestling. You consider the level of competition that he fought. Bellator, Blaine O'Driscoll. Taking on good guys over the Cage Warriors. You know, beating Luke Shanks definitely means something. The win that he had against Mitch Raposo over on Contender Series, he finishes him. That was one where people love Mitch Raposo. New England stand up. I mean, Carlos Candelario knows Mitch Raposo very well. But for Hadley, he gets that win by submission. Comes into the UFC against Alan Nascimento as more than a 2-1 favorite in the matchup. And couldn't really do a whole heck of a lot. And there was a big size difference. Like, Alan Nascimento, you see him down at Chute Box Diego Lima, training with Charles Oliveira, with, Thomas Almeida. And Nascimento looks as big, if not bigger, than those guys. So you could see that big size difference in the cage when Hadley was taking on Nascimento. But even when Hadley would get the takedown on Nascimento and Nascimento would end up on bottom, he'd threaten with a submission to then reverse position, and Hadley really didn't have any opportunities in that fight whatsoever.
And that's why it is interesting when you look at the last time Candelario was in the UFC octagon. He fought Taira, who, again, is one of the best prospects in the division. I think that's fair to say. He has more than proven that, and his offensive wrestling is legit. Like, don't take my word for it. Go back and watch his previous 2 fights. He is, again, like I said, he's a future top 15 guy, and he's going to be around for a really long time in the division. But for Candelario, he wasn't able to get much off of his back in that matchup. But the question is raised, is Jake Hadley going to be as controlling, I guess, in the top position as Tatsuro was able to be? Because, again, we point to one of the best prospects in the division. Then you look at Jake Hadley, a guy who can kind of stall out in some positions. And again, I know we always talk about the odds later on in the video, but just bring them up really quick because you had mentioned it. Hadley was a big favorite his first time out in the UFC, and normally when someone is a big favorite in their UFC debut and they look really underwhelming, they're not really given the benefit of the doubt by the odds makers the next time out. And that's why I am interested to see him as a 2 to almost 3-1 favorite in a lot of the odds books. So again, I don't really care what your overall opinion is of either fighter or what their ceiling is, but I don't really think there's a massive separation between either one of these guys, and that's why I'm very interested to see the odds where they are.
Again, for Hadley, higher level competition, former champion at a couple of different organizations, open -250, -277 for Candelario, open +210, +222, and I mean, just numbers on a page. Candelario's lost 2 in a row. Hadley obviously losing just his last fight
to a good fighter.
Candelario started off his pro and amateur career combined 13-0, and if you do look through it, I mean, decent offensive wrestling, good combinations to close the distance. Candelario is normally the guy that's crushing that distance between the two fighters. He's able to win out with a nice 1-2, the power with the volume. Then he takes the fight down to the mat, and once he softens you up on the feet, he's able to implement that ground and pound. For Jake Hadley, it very much is the wrestling. And if you go back to his title fight that he got against Luke Shanks, he gets wobbled by the first combination that Shanks throws, and then it's just takedown city for Hadley to the point where there was a judge that had it 50-40 242 in that matchup for Hadley winning in a big-time title fight. So you know that the cardio can be there. Now, Hadley missed weight on his Contender Series fight against Raposo. Dana White took a bullet for the kid because, they didn't want me to sign him. I'm signing him. He's the bad boy of the UFC. And Hadley's had a lot of matchups that have fallen out so far in a short UFC stint. So it'll be interesting to see what we do get out of him. But when you do look at it, I mean, great offensive wrestling, trains out of a great team in Birmingham. Obviously, Dominique Wooding just left Cage Warriors, ended up in the PFL. You got Sam Creasy, Vaughn Lee. I mean, everybody remembers Vaughn Lee, right? Like, he fought TJ Dillashaw.
He did fight TJ Dillashaw.
So, for Jake Hadley, we'll see if he's able to kind of meet fire with fire and if he's able to win out here. Because the odds, I don't necessarily love them. And when we're trying to kind of project a ceiling for the prospect, I know I like Jake Hadley, but I didn't kind of see him as high as maybe you did at one point.
I was really excited about him. That is what I wanted to bring up. I was really excited to see him fight Nascimento. I thought that was going to be a good fight, and it was. And again, that's what I do want to bring up. Losing to Alon Nascimento doesn't mean you're some scrub. Like, what?
Tagir Ulanbekov almost did. I thought he did.
You know what I mean, though? Like, again, that's a good fighter to lose to, and I do think that is an opportunity for you to learn. I just don't like where the odds are in this matchup. Again, I like Jake Hadley's engine, and I know that's a weird thing to kind of point to in this matchup, but I do think that if both these guys are involved in a lot of grappling-heavy exchanges, we see a lot of wrestling back and forth, a lot of scrambles. Well, that definitely plays into Jake Hadley's game plan over time. I do like his gas tank, and I like how he does scramble, and I like how he grapples. He grapples almost like a volume striker would strike, and he gives you a lot to think about when he is able to secure that offensive takedown. So, for those reasons, I do like Jake Hadley in this matchup, but I guess since I was so high on him coming into the UFC, I just want to see a nice solid performance from minute 1 to minute 15. I don't even want to finish, you know what I mean? It's one of those fights where if he wins in 40 seconds, he's going to teach me less than he would if he wins a unanimous decision where he looks really good. So I'm excited for the fight. I think both guys have a big opportunity in this matchup, but I do like Jake Hadley.
You hear that, ladies? He doesn't even want to finish. He's just there for you. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprise to us as they are to you. And I'm assuming that the fans are kind of thinking along your train of thought. The younger fighter, former 2 promotional champion, Jake Hadley. I'm going to say over-under. I'm going to go 82.5%. I think
it's going to be over. I think it'll be in the 90s.
It's going to be high, and it is. So 537 total votes, 93% Hadley, 50% by decision, 40% by submission. For the 7% that have Candelario, 64% by decision. And for me, it's more the fact that I've seen Candelario slow down in some of these fights. The Altamirano fight, the fight against Taira. When he's finishing them, he's getting it done very, very quickly, and I don't necessarily see Hadley as one of those guys that's going to get in a terribly compromising position all that early, and I think the fact that you can see some switch stances and southpaw looks from both of these guys, that opens up the threat of the body kick, and I think that actually helps Hadley a little bit more than it does Candelario. So for those reasons, I like Hadley in the matchup, but as Matt said, you know, you're going with a minus 275, minus 280 guy at this point. I don't necessarily see the value. I have to see some UFC wins first.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I like Hadley in the matchup, but it's one of those fights where it's okay. You win this, then we reassess what your ceiling is. Maybe you could get not a borderline top 15 fighter, but again, there's not a ton of fighters in the division, so at some point you're going to get one of those like top 25, top 20 guys, because again, there's not that many. So I do like Hadley in the matchup, and I agree where the splits are on Tapology. I agree with decision, but I could see a world where Candelario does get exhausted from a lot of the wrestling, and Hadley could win by submission later on if Candelario isn't really watching himself with the submission defense because fatigue has set in.
Both of us going with White Kong to get the win. Coming up this weekend, you have a big-time card. I'm really looking forward to Mario Bautista taking on Benito Lopez, and that's coming up very soon. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.